meditation. You may want to do that by sitting up straighter or putting your feet on the floor to ground yourself to the earth. Close your eyes if you want to, or just leave them partially open. And take in a nice deep breath and gently release it, releasing all of the stress of this week. This is a time for new beginnings. The past is behind us, and it is time for us to move forward. Most people don't strive for new beginnings because the unknown is scary. Even though people may not like where they are at the moment, in a job, relationship, anything, it is still familiar, comfortable, predictable, and requires minimal effort. It's often avoidance, not being honest with ourselves, and resistance, too hard to change, which is based on fear, that stops us. If we can look for the blessing in disguise, it will move us through the challenges more quickly. If we want to make better choices, we need to ask better questions. Like, what is this teaching me, and how can I use it to move forward? Maybe now is the time to say yes. There are no steps too small if they are moving you in the right direction. I encourage you to start asking yourself, does this thought come from fear or faith? If it comes from fear, know that it won't move you forward, so why would you listen to it? Choose to live life with passion. Fall back in love with life and take back control of your thought process so you can choose what you listen to. Embrace life's opportunities with faith and trust. We can't keep doing the same thing and expect a different result. Maybe it's time to try a new approach. Give yourself permission to receive great things. We'll now have a moment of silent meditation, which Jaceel will bring us out of with some music.
Our reading this morning, The Practice of Mindfulness, is by Thich Nhat Hanh. Our home is not in the past. Our true home is not in the future. Our true home is in the here and the now. Life is available only in the here and the now, and it is our true home. Mindfulness is the energy that helps us recognize the conditions of happiness that already are present in our lives. You don't have to wait 10 years to experience this happiness. It is present in every moment of your daily life. There are those of us who are alive but don't know it. But when you breathe in and you are aware of your in-breath, you touch the miracle of being alive. That is why mindfulness is a source of happiness and joy. Most people are forgetful. They are not really there a lot of the time. Their mind is caught in their worries, their fears, their anger, and their regrets, and they are not mindful of being there. That state of being is called forgetfulness. You are there, but you are not there. You are caught in the past or in the future. You are not there in the present moment, living your life deeply. That is forgetfulness. The opposite of forgetfulness is mindfulness. Mindfulness is when you are truly there, mind and body together. You breathe in and out mindfully. You bring your mind back to your body, and you are there. When your mind is there with your body, you are established in your personal moment, in your present moment. Then you can recognize the many conditions of happiness that are in you and around you. Happiness just comes naturally. Anything can be the object of your meditation, and with the powerful energy of concentration, you can make a breakthrough and develop insight. It's like a magnifying glass concentrating the light of the sun. If you put the point of concentrated light on a piece of paper, it will burn. Similarly, when your mindfulness and concentration are powerful, your insight will liberate you from fear, anger, and despair, and bring you true joy, true peace, and true happiness.
And from the depths of silent meditation and the wisdom of the Zen masters, we now go to a rock concert. I want you to sit back and relax, or if the spirit moves you, feel free to get up and dance or do some pretty wicked air guitar if you feel like it, because the spirit may move you to do that, as we all enjoy a little AC/DC. Before the pandemic, I used to cut butter for 1 hour every day. You see, I worked Tuesday through Saturday at a bakery in Austin, Texas. This was a kind of a boutique bakery, the sort that you can really only find in a city like Austin, which specialized in tiny pies. That is to say, small pies of various fillings that were baked in muffin tins, sort of like cashing in on the cupcake craze of a few years ago, only pies. My job was to make pie dough all day, every day. I would put together the ingredients in this sort of large industrial mixer and let it all come together and then dump it out onto a table. And there we would come together, wrap it in plastic and let it sit in the fridge overnight. And then the next day, roll it out with this big machine and cut it using hand cutters. Each batch probably weighed about 40 pounds of pie dough, and I would repeat this process at least twice a shift. One of the key steps in the process of making that much pie dough at once means that you have to cut each batch 9 1-pound blocks of European-style butter. Now, there were people who were better at it than I was, but it took me at least an hour to cut butter for 2 batches, just to cut the butter alone. Well, why do this? Why work at a bakery? Why fight the infamous Austin traffic there and back every day, spending most of it on my feet doing back-breaking manual labor? Well, part of the reason I did it is because I love to bake. It's also kind of in my blood. My great-grandfather was a baker, trained in the old world before immigrating to Ohio and Czechoslovakia. I never met him, but I feel a kinship to him. That's one reason. The real reason, though, may surprise you. The real reason I was a baker was because it was not ministry. You see, last year I needed a break. The year before had been an extremely difficult one for me personally. I had unexpectedly been served with divorce papers just months from our 15th wedding anniversary, the details of which aren't really important, but we had grown apart for some time. However, it was still a surprise when I received a knock on the church door. Of all things, I was waiting to do a pre-wedding meeting with a couple. And instead, I found a man who gave me these papers, steeped in legal language, who calmly and kindly explained what was going on. I can't describe to you that feeling, only that it was this intense cocktail of extreme fear and extreme confusion mixed together. I remember the world literally spinning before my eyes. I couldn't believe what was happening to me. That day was the first day of a long and painful journey. Being born in the Midwest of German-American stock, my first reaction was to ignore my feelings. Just keep going. Eventually, my wife moved out, and our two sons moved with her to Dayton, Ohio. I moved out of our house and into a much smaller apartment. Both being separated from my boys, who are my heart, and having to move into an unfamiliar place brought on that now all too familiar feeling of fear and confusion. What do I do now? Well, I got some therapy, but kept pushing forward, as I always had. I was a seasoned pro, after all. Surely that momentum can just carry me through. So I fooled myself. I was in denial. I had not yet realized that my life as I knew it was over and that a new life was about to begin. Now, to be fair, that is a hard realization to come to on one's own in the moment. I only just figured it out in retrospect. Denial is a common and, in its own way, healthy reaction to sudden news such as loss. But it is, at best, a short-term answer. You cannot live your whole life in denial or forgetfulness, as Thich Nhat Hanh calls it. At some point, my outer life and my inner life had to be reconciled to each other. Bringing the inner life and the outer life together is the definition of what is known as authenticity. Authenticity has a long and storied career among us Unitarian Universalists as one of our most cherished values. Indeed, we find it most eloquently stated in Emerson's essay, Self-Reliance. He writes, "There is a time in every man's education when he arrives at the convention that envy is ignorance, that imitation is suicide, that he must take himself, for better or worse, at his portion, that though the wide universal is full of good, no kernel of nourishing corn can come to him, but through his toil, bestowed on that plot of ground which is given him to till. The power which resides in him is new in nature, and none but he knows what that is, which he can do. Nor does he know until he has tried." Now, despite the inherently sexist language of his day, Emerson conveys to us that just because the universal is good, it doesn't automatically make us all saints. Like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, we carried the ruby slippers with us throughout the adventure, but the real key is understanding their worth and purpose in our own time. Some critics of Unitarian Universalism have asserted that we have no theology, that you can believe whatever you want. Actually, we believe whatever we can. Our beliefs are, as Emerson notes, the functions of our insights translated into our lived experience. It is the inner world and the outer world come together to make a beautiful life. By the end of that first year, I knew I needed a break, not just from that church, but from ministry in general, to see if it truly was what I wanted to do on my plot of land. Was there still a call to serve not just the people, but to serve, represent, and speak for those forces of truth, beauty, and goodness that pervade the universe? If it was anything less, then I would not be worthy of the calling to Unitarian Universalist ministry. The only way to know was to take a step back. Thus, I left my ministry in Texas and set out on a new journey, one that could not be planned. I suppose it was something of a gap year in ministry. I thought of it more like a sabbatical. There were no rules, except that I do nothing resembling ministry for 1 year. I did a lot of reading, did some writing, mostly journaling. I went for walks in the mild Texas winters, starting eating better, and lost 40 pounds in that sabbatical year. I restarted my meditation practice and focused on relaxing, letting things go. I grieved the loss of my marriage and what it had been and what it had become, and finally faced the internal pain that I had been trying to avoid. I rediscovered mindfulness in that year. I came to understand how the little things that we do every day affect the big things going on in our life. This is true for me personally, but it's also true about how I did ministry. Concentrating on the little things allowed me to have some insight into those big things that were happening to me. Which brings me back to butter. Cutting it over and over with a dough scraper. For those of you who aren't bakers or maybe used to butter coming in sticks, this did not. Imagine butter that you normally buy in a container all together instead of divided into 4 sticks. And in order to make pie dough, this butter needs to be cut into small cubes, about 1/4 to a 1/2 inch square. For 2 batches, that's 18 pounds of butter cut and separated into a large bowl before dumping them into 10 pounds of flour and mixing it together. From 4 until 5 every day, I cut butter. I used to jokingly call it the hour of butter. In our reading today, Thich Nhat Hanh says that anything can be the object of our meditation and concentration, that it could be the conduit for joy and happiness, even enlightenment. Eventually, not on my first day, the hour of butter became my hour just to do one thing over and over and try to cultivate that mindful attention to the present. Some days it worked. Other days I was distracted. Sometimes, and those times were rare, I would be rolling and cutting pie dough and have a little moment of realization. I came to understand that I had been too distracted from the details of my own life, that like cutting butter, I needed to pay attention to the little everyday things, how I am with friends and family, how I felt in my body, where I was in my relationship, and yes, what was my call to ministry. Now, I won't lie to you. There were more days when it was hard work than it was chopping wood and carrying water in some mystical Zen fashion. My coworkers were all considerably younger than I was, and they controlled the music that was played while we worked. Work goes so much easier with good music in the background and so much slower when it's bad. And I know this reveals my age, but I don't care much for music these days. I'm a huge fan of jazz and especially blues. Last year I got a old school record player and fell in love again with classic rock. And every once in a while I could talk them into switching it over to the local classic rock station. And I would have the time of my life cutting butter and rolling dough all afternoon. One of my favorite albums, one that should be in the conversation for greatest rock album of all time, if you ask me, is Back in Black by AC/DC, which, by the way, just celebrated its 40th anniversary a couple of months ago. One day, the title song, which we all just heard and experienced, came on at the bakery. On one of those rare days that I got to listen to my old man music at work. And while I was listening to it, I mused, what if black referred to a preaching robe or the black suit that I wear most Sundays? Being out of the pulpit so long, I was prone to making even small things into these grand sermonic interpretations, kind of a hazard of the job, if you will. But from then on, Back in Black became my joke to myself about coming back into being in that black preaching robe, coming back to ministry. It was not a call to ministry, but a call back to ministry. Back in Black. I hit the sack. I've been too long. I'm glad to be back. Pretty appropriate first line of the song. Actually, it's no coincidence. Back in Black was written as a tribute to Bon Scott, the first lead singer of AC/DC, who had died tragically in a car accident a few years before. The new singer, Brian Johnson, wanted a song that honored his memory but was also celebratory. For the band, after a loss, there was a pause and then a return. Plus, I love the passion and the energy in that song. It isn't just kind of slinking back. It is back in black with a vengeance, with the desire and focus I had 20 years ago when I was fresh out of seminary and into my first call in a small church in Omaha, Nebraska. It means coming back to ministry, but coming back in a new way, polished by my experiences of loss. Renewing my call to ministry means doing it in a new way, a mindful way. Ministry that authentically connects the inner soul and the outer actions. A ministry that connects me to the source of all that is just and life-giving in the universe. A ministry that connects me to all of you, and all of you to each other as a beloved community. That's my vision for ministry as we start this time together. Maybe you've had that feeling of fear and confusion too. Maybe church has become at times a source of stress and anxiety for you instead of a joyful sanctuary of renewal. I understand. Believe me, I know that feeling all too well. But I also know what it means to come back from there, to find joy and happiness, to borrow Thich Nhat Hanh's words, by paying attention to the little things in my life. I mean, really paying attention to what is in the present moment, to relax and breathe into whatever is right here and right now. Don't worry if it's painful or unpleasant. Such feelings are not permanent. Instead, I try to understand those painful experiences of loss as teachers. They teach me to have an open mind and a compassionate heart so that I may learn the lessons that loss can bring. One of my favorite quotes that I used to share with friends when they would show concern and were often very thoughtful in contacting me during my sabbatical was from the movie Batman Begins, in which his butler Alfred asks Bruce Wayne, "Why do we fall, Master Bruce?" So that we can learn how to pick ourselves back up. Today is the beginning of picking ourselves back up. Falling may be painful, but it's easy compared to coming back in a new and transformed way. The temptation, of course, is to fall back into old patterns. It's hard to live into that new vision. But that's exactly what I invite you to do. I ask no more of you than I ask of myself. We must let go of the hurt and pain of the past without being in denial that it really happened. We must be open to the blessings and lessons that such experiences can bestow. We must not neglect the small, quiet moments of insight into the present moment, seeing how those small acts of kindness and service to others transforms them and transforms us, and eventually it transforms the world. But most of all, I think AC/DC had the right approach. They took the heartbreaking loss of their friend and bandmate and made their comeback into a celebration. Heck, they turned that celebration into the most recognizable rock and roll songs of all time. May we begin our ministry together with just a fraction of the energy and passion and enthusiasm that their song evokes. May we always strive for authentic living, no matter how difficult it can be. And may we never forget to pay attention to whatever comes up, whether it is writing a sermon or cutting butter, because there are wondrous gifts to be had. I love you. Go in peace. Amen. And at this time, I invite you to join in our hymn. As we come to the time to go our separate ways, let us take our leave, inspirited by the words we've shared, the community we've experienced, the beauty with which we've been surrounded, and the commitments we have nurtured. Let us take our leave, ready to do what we can to make ours a better world in which to live. Amen. Go in peace.